in this month's webinar from OSRL, we're focusing on spills that are not oil spills, because that's, you know, an important topic to talk about too as well, especially as we see, you know, more extreme weather situations, more risks for cargo loss and shipping routes. So this is a really exciting webinar. We have some really good resources to share with you as well that you can then take with you after the webinar. And we have a really amazing team of people that have been involved in creating industry guidance for this type of spills as well. And one of our presenters today has also had first-hand experience in responding to a non-oil spill. So really, really good stuff. We're really excited to share it with you. So no further ado, I will pass it on to our presenters.
Yeah, if we can go to the next slide, Ami. And just a short introduction, I guess. As you could see on the screen, there is a bit of a run through of what we're going to cover. There's a bit of kind of introduction with why this subject is important and what we are going to share. And then we will go a little bit around the plastic response, finishing up with the case study. So Bami will share that with his experience from being actually in the field. Yeah, and just our speakers today. So I will start first with giving kind of an overview of where we are and why is it important. So I'm my current position in OSRL is New Markets and New Services Lead, and I've been in OSRL for about 13 years now. So I have experience with different kind of subjects, and this new area where members were recognizing that there is a need to kind of look beyond our traditional oil and gas response. And that's kind of where I'm coming in with looking at potential risks and potential future, what will happen, and where we can come in and share our expertise. Can I have the next slide, Bami? Yeah, so with where we are currently, you know, we can all see that the landscape of where we are in terms of a risk is changing. And we have traditionally, we had a lot of incidents that were related with oil. And obviously the cargo incidents happened before, but we are seeing an increase with that sort of incidents. And it's not only that we can see it. It also does. They don't really fit with traditional framework as we see with the response. So there is several factors. You know, there is a fact of weather being changed, and it's not only about the climate change. It's also the fact that the weather becomes a bit more unpredictable. And as such, the risks itself become quite complex. We also have diversification of the cargo. So, you know, as in the past, maybe not as many different products were being shipped on the vessels. And also the fact that, you know, the vessels are being bigger, that also kind of introduce additional complexity to the scenario. And because of all of these factors, you know, we kind of see this new way of, or maybe a need to find a new way to have more adaptive response strategies, to understand how we can maybe potentially use some of the existing procedures or response strategies that we have, and how we can kind of translate it to help also to see how we can help with the new incidents. Next slide, please. And one more. Yeah. So where we are seeing now, so I brought together a few facts just to show you kind of where we are and how it looks like from the point of view of statistics and the facts that we have. And you can see there, if you can click one more time, Bami, that kind of shows us the graph as well. So over 90% of international trade at the moment is transported by sea. And you can see on the graph there that this is only going to increase. I'm not sure if you see the numbers, but it's basically the graph is increasing, so it goes beyond 2030. So we can only expect that this kind of a frequency will only increase. And knowing that, you know, we have to be prepared for what we are going to do if that's going to increase. If we go to the next slide, please. And one more. So with that, we can also see that it's not only the fact that we have more shipping happening through the increasing the numbers, we also have larger vessels, and you can see there on the slide how much it actually increased, and from even the size of the vessel, but also how much they can actually carry, and the units on there are actually how many of the 20-foot containers vessels can fit on themselves, and you can see the size, but also the capacity, but also the stackability. So how many of the containers the vessel can actually stack on top of each other, and it's massive. I mean, you can see some of this ultra large container vessels. We are talking about a very different scale of incidents if we are having this kind of vessel involved in an incident. Next one, please. Yeah, the other thing is also the fact about the shipping itself. So with as many shipping happening, you can see that there is certain routes that are becoming increasingly busy, and that's where we can see the higher potential of having a risk. And it's also about the fact that just the sheer volume of the vessels coming through these points, and the volume and all the other factors we covered. So possibility of having any incidents like collisions, grounding, or cargo loss, that naturally increases. So that's, you can see on the map, it's again, if we are looking at the increasing volume, it will also increase more with the kind of a heat map, as you can see in here. And there will be obviously some of the kind of a choke points, as you call it. So some of the canals, and Suez Canal, Panama Canal, and others. And as you know now, there's additional complexity happening with the geopolitical situation, which again adds another factor to already busy kind of a landscape that we have with the risk. You can go to the next one, Bami. Yeah, and that's just, yeah, if you can open the graph as well. So that's a graph I wanted to just show you, or a map that I found, and I thought it's kind of interesting to show. That was a review in one of the research paper I found, and you can see that throughout the 20-year period, they found that 64 maritime events were attributed to the heavy weather. So that's a quite a big number, and it's clearly shown, what kind of vessels and what kind of what happened and where it happened, and that only highlights the importance and the kind of the future of what's going to happen. And this review was only done, I think, to 2021. Yes. So there is still a significant amount of years that were not contributed to this map. So we can probably see even more of that in there. But it was interesting to show that how many of the events were actually attributed to the heavy weather already at that time. Okay, and if we can have a next one, please, Bami. Yeah, so obviously we were talking about the weather and the fact that there is a climate change, and how that is one of the major forces that reshape that maritime risks. And it's not only about the frequency of this extreme weather happening, but also intensity. We all heard about the typhoons and the storms and the rough seas and so on, and also the fact that as much as in the past, maybe sometimes you were able to predict some of the events happening, whereas now it's actually becoming much more difficult to predict any of these events. So it's not only the fact that we will not potentially rely on this historical weather patterns. What it also does is that it puts operational stress on the teams doing it, but it also adds additional stress to like the supply chain. Because if you imagine vessels having an incident at sea, or potentially not being able to come out of the port, that creates the queue at the port. It creates a delay. It creates a stress that maybe you will not be able to fulfill your timelines instead of delivery. And that's and we all know how it works if we have all these factors coming on top of each other. And what that can cause, it's the human factor then being stressed and so on. So from that point of view, climate change is not adding any more hazards that we already know. It's nothing new. We have done it before, but it's just amplifying this uncertainty of having more potentially, complicating decision making and some of the possible scenarios that will happen with that. So that's kind of where we are with that. The next one, please, Bami. So there has been already a few incidents, and one of those actually happened really recently in UK here in January this year, where we have an incident of near Isle of Wight in UK, when one of the vessel which lost 16 containers, and she carried different cargo, but the most kind of a visible one was that end up on the shoreline was the bananas and the frozen food and some of the foam. And that, we all listened about it on the radio, and we kind of tried to see how we can what can we see from the point of view of the responders, of how the response is being set up and where the gaps potentially are. So it was quite interesting to understand or like see it firsthand. But there were more of these incidents, and there was one. In 2020 in Asia, one of the cargo vessels lost 2,000 containers at sea due to rough weather on its way to Japan in the Pacific Ocean. So that, there's not one region that it doesn't happen. And again, in North and South America, we had quite a lot of incidents. One of them was quite a big one, which was the Kingston in 2021 off the Vancouver Island in Canada. And again, because of the severe weather, the vessel lost 109 containers. And again, the things that were washing on the beaches were quite random. There were refrigerators and rubber boots and toys and so on. So what it means is that we will come across this cargo that potentially is a new type of items we have to remove from the shoreline. And not only that, it's also the fact that sometimes we might not know what is in the containers. Sometimes there might be a dangerous goods as well. So there will be a safety concerns on top of this too. But even with the sheer volume of having a bananas on the shoreline, how would you then remove it? How quickly you have to remove it? There's so many questions that you can kind of you have to ask about this, and also the fact that it will most likely end up on the shoreline. You have to think about other parties that will be involved in this as well. You might have the local councils involved. You might have some volunteers. Can people actually take bananas home and eat them? It's there's a lot of kind of layers that adds up to that, and also the fact that it is now a very visible kind of, we are living in a world where everything is being shared quite easily. So it's very easy to have a social media involved and showing it firsthand. And that also adds the pressure of people involved or the responders involved to show the right protocols and to inform people that it's, the things that we do are done according to certain procedures, and it's not just made up. Just to kind of rock up and clean it up. And also from environmental point of view, even though we have, I don't know, containers of bananas on the shoreline, it's still a pollution, so we still have to remove it. So it's not the fact of, oh, we just can leave it, it will be fine. It will be the case of removing it, and then we have to understand how quickly and what does it actually contain to do it. Next one, please. Yeah, so just to summarize, it's what I guess I'm trying to get to is that I think we have to rethink the current risk landscape or kind of our responses to the current risk landscape and see how much maybe some of the existing procedures or existing kind of a guidance that we have for oil spills can be relevant to that as well. And we know that things like SCAT, for example, work really well because we can then, you can choose certain parts of the shoreline that we can clean up. We can prioritize which of the shorelines have to be cleaned up first, and we can set up all the zones. So this can be used for cargo incidents the same way as for oil. So we already have certain things that can be used. We just have to kind of go through for the procedure or for the guidance and understand what else we can add for that. And even the fact of having responders available who have this knowledge and who can come in and even organize a response team, that's very helpful too. So there are resources. We just have to also ensure that this knowledge is shared with whoever else is dealing with this incident. So we can then help to alleviate some of this pressure that comes in on the on other organizations. And the thing is, it's also a part of awareness of trying to inform people that there is guidance, there is things we can do already, maybe share some of the capability through training, or like we now do with the webinars, to start this conversation and see how we can share some of the lessons learned. And with that, I will pass on to my colleague who will be talking about some of the plastic pellet response issues, or how it, and actually one of these cargo spills can be a plastic response. So we just wanted to give it as an example of what can be done.
Perfect. Thank you, Marta. So my name is Bronwyn Lee. I am part of our preparedness department, part of our training and consultancy department. I've been at OSRL for 3 years and have a background in marine biology, oceanography, and environmental science. I'm also a member of our plastic response working group. So yeah, I'm going to take you through kind of this small section is focused on plastics as an example. However, many of kind of the principles that I'm going to allude to can be applied to other kind of non-oil products too. Next slide, please, Bami. So I think it's first important to introduce, obviously OSRL have 40 years or so experience dealing with oil spill incidents and oil products. However, we're aware that plastics obviously behave very differently. So despite this experience, there's still that learning curve, and it's important to consider kind of how they differ from oil. So I've got kind of these main points here. First of all, looking at persistence, plastics don't go away naturally. They won't naturally recover. They won't be weathered. Evaporation is not going to happen. So therefore, when we're kind of looking at endpoints, and maybe during an oil spill, you can, kind of what your endpoint might be, what will actually be necessary. With plastics, it does become a lot harder, because without intervention, they will remain in the environment for long periods of time. And therefore, it leaves those responses potentially kind of open-ended as to how clean is clean, when actually it's not going to degrade naturally. The next point is looking at that dispersion. So nurdles are very lightweight, easily dispersed, and can spread over hundreds of kilometers of shorelines and open water. And while we know, again, from oil spill experience, that oil drift is often kind of approximated to 100% of the current, 3% of the wind speed, floating plastics don't follow necessarily like a fixed rule so it therefore makes it more difficult to potentially track where they're going to be going, how they're going to behave. And their movement is often more variable due to kind of the way they sit on the water surface. They're kind of floating slightly above that water surface, and therefore maybe slightly more influenced by the winds. And because they don't form those slicks where they're all stuck together, they can kind of disperse into lots of different fragmented sections. We also find it very difficult to recover these offshore. So a lot of the time, recovery at sea is very limited, and responders are often forced kind of into that labor-intensive shoreline operation. And we usually only see success when offshore response, when those pellets are kind of either remain packaged in bags, cargoes, clustered, or burnt into like big, large, what we call kind of nurdlebergs, big, large clusters of pellets. Looking at remobilization and burial, as much as we know, obviously oil does make its way into the sediments. Usually it kind of infiltrates into the sediment and coats that sediment, whereas in the case of these plastic pellets, because they are a similar size to sand and gravel, they readily kind of mix into the sediment, so they behave much like the sand and kind of gravels, as opposed to kind of coating them, which therefore we found leads to kind of greater persistence, and they continually cycle and kind of remobilize over much longer periods of time, which is leading to many areas needing kind of repeat assessments, repeat treatment, even after people believe that the cleanup is finished. Levels of background pollution are obviously an important one to consider. You're not typically, hopefully, seeing huge amounts of oil on kind of local beaches or shorelines. However, it is a shame, but we're obviously seeing a lot more plastic pollution already kind of present in the environment. and that makes it very difficult to distinguish newly spilled material from existing contamination. This makes it very complicated when we're trying to do assessments on the shorelines, and looking at kind of the impacts of these plastic pellets, and also again with those endpoints deciding, are we bringing the shoreline back to the state it was in if that was previously kind of contaminated with other litter rubbish, or are we going to be kind of cleaning it to a completely pristine point? And then finally, that last point about lack of regulation. Currently, there's no real mature regulatory framework like there is for oils. Oil spills sit kind of within that well-established like international convention, and they'll typically be kind of national contingency plans or kind of local contingency plans. And unfortunately, plastics kind of don't fit in to any real category, and they kind of fall between cargo loss, waste management, environmental regulation. And that typically creates that uncertainty around who is responsible for these spills, those endpoints as well. So kind of one point from this is just important to consider if plastics are, or whatever cargo you are shipping around, considering whether your contingency plan that you're using for oil would be applicable for whatever product you may spill, such as plastics, or whether a separate plan or an addendum would potentially be necessary, because it's not necessarily all the points for oil might not necessarily apply to plastics. Next slide, please. So kind of moving on the opposite side of that point, there are a number of points that do still kind of transfer directly from that oil spill response. So we do have field guides that OSRL have produced for kind of each of these points I'm going through, which are available on our website if you want kind of a deeper dive into these. However, yeah, I'm going to go through the bits that do transfer directly from oil spill response kind of into plastic / kind of non-oil products. So starting off, we're looking at making sure we ensure that there is still that structured response with that command and control. So one of the biggest areas that can transfer is the need for that clear structured incident management system. Whether it's oil, plastics, ammonias, low sulfur fuel oils, you still are likely to have multiple organizations involved, whether that be operators, regulators, contractors, NGOs, volunteers, local communities. So making sure that you have those defined roles, having those reporting lines, and kind of set decision-making processes is really critical to make sure that obviously all stakeholders can be involved, but to also avoid confusion, duplication of effort, and obviously time and money wasted. Secondly, we're looking at that assessment-led decision-making. So that's looking at modeling, surveillance, ground truthing. As with oil spills, we shouldn't be kind of basing that response off of nothing. We shouldn't be defaulting straight to the cleanup. What we need to be doing is understanding where that pollution is, where it's going, and what's at risk before acting and sending resources to certain areas. So that means we want to be using modeling, aerial surveillance, shoreline surveillance, and ground truthing to build that evidence base. And it's important to note that modeling, as much as the product kind of may float on the surface, as I've mentioned, it may behave differently to oils. So as much as you need to make sure that that model is bespoke to whatever product has been spilled, because as I've mentioned, with different properties, it might not be behaving exactly the same as you might expect oil to. So yeah, for plastics, obviously that's really important because, as I've mentioned, the distribution can be really patchy and much less visible than oil from the surface. The next step, looking at that phased response, it also transfers well to non-oil products. So we obviously move from those initial actions, which is looking at that bulk recovery, containment as much as possible, along that kind of spectrum into that targeted cleanup and monitoring towards the end of the response. With this helps to prioritize people's effort. We can manage resources and avoid that unnecessary disturbance to the environment, especially in those environments that are particularly sensitive. That kind of leads me on nicely to the next step, which is looking at net environmental benefit analysis and making sure that our strategy selections that we are choosing are still continuing to be risk-based. So a bit of an introduction to net environmental benefit analysis. Not all cleanup techniques and all cleanup is going to be beneficial. Sometimes intervention can actually cause more harm. by introducing new people into kind of sensitive environments, particularly if they are very fragile environments. So what we want to be doing, much like we would with oil spills, is making sure that our decisions are always based on that environmental benefit, balancing that against the potential impacts of the response itself. And then the final point is, I know Martis mentioned previously, but looking at the principles behind SCAT. So Shoreline Clean-up Assessment Technique is a really strong framework that has been implemented into that kind of oil spill response world, and it can be translated pretty directly into non-oil spill response. It gives us that systematic, repeatable way of assessing shorelines. We segment them, and then we can define those appropriate response strategies and endpoints for certain areas. And even though the pollutant is obviously behaving slightly differently, we do need to have that consistent terminology and that structure to make sure that that response is as efficient as possible. Next slide, please. So this slide is just again a bit of a deeper dive into that SCAT technique and all of the principles of that. So a lot of what we already know from oil spill response still applies, particularly, as I've mentioned, that structured systematic approach that SCAT can provide to a shoreline assessment. We're still segmenting the shoreline in the same way, such as by kind of set distances, pollution levels, shoreline types. We're still recording that shoreline type and sensitivity, which I will explain how we do that in a couple of slides' time. And we're still using that consistent framework so we can compare sites and prioritize where we should be focusing our effort. So yeah, fundamentally SCAT, as the process stays the same, it's still about that kind of clear, repeatable process. But where things do start to change is how we're describing that contamination itself. So instead of kind of thickness or coverage like we might use for oil, we lean towards, for plastics, for example, we lean towards kind of relative contamination levels, such as low, medium, high. The way we assess this, again, I'm going to explain in future slides, but we use this because rather than dealing with like a large slick or like a big continuous slick, we're actually dealing with millions or like trillions of individual tiny particles rather than that continuous slick. We also, for plastics, it's really important to capture that pellet condition, whether they're kind of virgin pellets that haven't been disturbed, whether they've been burnt, melted, fragmented, clumped together. And this is really important because in terms of our response, it affects how easy they are to recover. If we've got those large nurdlebergs, as I've spoken about previously, they're obviously much larger, much heavier, potentially easier to kind of lift with manpower. However, if we're dealing with those individual nurdles, we're obviously dealing with a much smaller product. It's a much more intricate kind of response technique. It's also important from a health and safety point of view as well. And also when we're looking at waste disposal, how are we dealing with kind of the smaller pellets or like the large clumps? They're going to be handled differently. So yeah, the main point from this slide is that the link between the assessment and the decision making remains exactly the same. So we're still using SCAT for those to provide answers to those same questions that we'll always be looking at on the shoreline, such as where we should be prioritizing, what techniques are appropriate, and at what point does that response stop adding value. So therefore kind of dictating those endpoints. So it's less about kind of changing the system and more about just adapting the detail to kind of suit that specific pollutant that you're dealing with. Next slide, please. So OSRL and IPECA produced a field guide at the end of last year, which focuses primarily on plastic pellets, and it introduces a quick quantification method, which is specifically designed for those pellets. And the aim is to give responders kind of that rapid but structured way to assess contamination levels, much like you would do with SCAT with oil, and like without needing that kind of time-intensive counting, because I think it would be a very tedious process. Can you press next, please, Bami, so we can bring that up? So it's kind of the main points are it's designed to be quick. What we want is teams to be able to make decisions in the field in real time, and it's important that process obviously is quick because, as I've mentioned, those pellets can travel large distances, be remobilized, move around quite a lot. So it's important that we're not waiting long periods of time for kind of detailed data, scientific analysis, which will therefore like delay that response. This kind of quick proposed quantification method requires kind of 2 minutes per selected site, and that's all that's needed to kind of measure the kind of the nodal distribution that you've got. The method's also repeatable, so different survey teams in different sites can get consistent results, which is critical to obviously building that reliable overall picture across a large coastline. And instead of exact counts, which again I said would be quite a tedious process, it uses broad categories like high, medium, low, which therefore makes it easier, again, to compare between those locations and track how that cleanup is developing over time, even when the conditions of the shoreline vary. I think most importantly as well, it's practical in the field. I know this was kind of practiced in the field. I know Bami is going to mention a bit later. So yeah, very practical, doesn't involve kind of counting individual pellets or taking detailed samples, as that isn't always necessarily realistic over large areas. So it's trying to balance that accuracy, but also with usability kind of in on the ground. So this all kind of, as you can probably see, aligns very closely with SCAT principles. We've got that structured, standardized shoreline assessment kind of approach to decision making. And the difference is simply in what we're measuring, not the overall approach. And it's worth noting that obviously, while this is operational guidance for plastics, it's not the only method that can be used. And there's no kind of single global standard at the moment for plastic. So that's what we're obviously trying to propose, kind of introduce. We need a bit more kind of global guidance on what we should be doing. Next slide, please. Another key tool that we'll be using, obviously, for part of that assessment, which we use for both oils and other products, is that environmental sensitivity index produced by NOAA. So this gives, again, a standardized kind of index or a key of how we would define the sensitivities of different shorelines. At the lower end of the scale, we've got environments such as rocky shores that are less sensitive because wave action, they're kind of highly energetic environments. Wave action tends to naturally remove oil and products from them. Whereas on that kind of other end, we've got mangroves that are hugely sensitive due to them being low energy, ecologically important, and very difficult to clean without kind of causing any damage. So this index is obviously is taken from kind of oil spill response, but applies perfectly to any other product, not just oil itself. Next slide, please. And finally, from me, this field guide also offers a kind of response strategy flowchart, which helps to kind of guide that decision-making process for selecting the best cleanup strategy, depending on kind of the scenario you've been given or scenario you've been dealt during that incident. The key kind of message is that there's no kind of one size fits all, no one response technique is going to work for all environments, all spills. But the kind of approach must be based on an assessment of multiple factors, such as the material itself, as I've mentioned, what state is that plastic in, what type of plastic is it, shoreline type and physical environments. So you've got sandy beaches versus rocky coasts. Product is obviously going to respond very differently in both. The degree of pollution, which we've obviously worked out from that shoreline assessment technique. And then also takes into consideration those environmental sensitivities, so social and cultural sensitivities as well, such as like tourism, fisheries, local communities, and also kind of most importantly as well, practical considerations such as site access, availability of personnel, waste management options, and health and safety risks, making sure that responders can get safely to and from the beach. We're considering kind of tidal patterns, making sure that any form of equipment we're bringing down there is going to be safe to be used. Yes, that is it from me. I will pass over to my colleague, Bami.
Thanks, Bronwyn. As per introduction, my name is Bami, Bami Manzo, part of the response department here in OSRL. I'm also one of the duty managers on on call sometimes. So when you do call for any form of incident or support, probably you might be talking to me, or probably I might have spoken to some of you online. So it's nice to probably be part of this webinar and to run you through like a first account of my own experience on this particular response that we had in 2021, which had to do with the plastic noodle spills involving the Express Pearl vessel. I'm sure probably some of you might have seen this in the news or in some media outlets at the time. So I'll probably just make a start. Basically, the Express Pearl incident was caused by a fire outbreak on the vessel itself. And in terms of the cargo on that particular vessel, you had up to 1,000, more than close to like 1,500 containers on board. 81 classified as dangerous goods. 25 tons of nitric acids and other chemicals, 300 cubic meters of HFO fuel as well at risk of release. And then the topic of today, some virgin plastic pellets were also being transported in this vessel. In terms of giving you a rough incident timeline, the fire started 20th of May, 2021. For us, OSRL, we were being notified by some of our industry partners, ITOF, whom we work closely together with, especially around engagement and preparedness activities, sometimes supporting mutual members as well, or previous spill experience, which kind of portrays the importance of networking, keeping that networking communication open, and continue conversing to make sure that we work well for things like this. So that worked really well. And then in 2nd of June, that Express Pearl sank, which literally is not far from some of the coastal areas of Sri Lanka. From the beach, you can literally see where the vessel is from some viewpoints. There was a loss of cargo, so some of the containers on that vessel sank, thereby releasing some of the content of that and impacting some of the shorelines. And most of the cargoes, as probably you might have seen in the news, is the plastic pellets. Hence why we got called out on the 26th of May to support this particular response as well. Just to give you an idea of different key stakeholders that took part in this response, as with any other response you can imagine, you have different people that probably have different level of interest, different level of stakes in that particular response. So for this particular response, it was the London P&I Club, being a vessel, obviously, the insurance company for that particular vessel. They were the mobilizing party that got us out to go out there to support. ITOF, being the technical advisors to the club, also were very key parts of this particular response, and we work closely together with them. The local environmental agency, which is the Marine Environmental Protection Agency, MIPA, were heavily involved in the response itself, mostly around local logistics. And as you'd imagine, sometimes they go to the stage of interpretation as well, because there was a challenge around language barrier. So ensuring that we communicate effectively and ensuring that whatever we're communicating is clear as well in terms of setting our objectives for this particular response to the other groups, especially with the military workforce, because we had support from the military outfit in Sri Lanka, which was really good to see. They were all out heavily involved in this particular cleanup on a daily basis. Also, we had the environmental unit from the UNEP group with support from CEDRA. And then we had the GAC group. The GAC group basically are just in charge of sorting out, for example, deployment vessels that are needed to be standby close to the casualty vessel, sorting out transportation for the responders, organizing launches and any form of logistics for this particular response. At the end of the day, it was just all about open communications amongst all of us. Yes, sometimes you might think the communication will be convoluted, but it's just a matter of kind of aligning to the message, to ensuring that we minimize the impacts of these plastics to the environment, and even those that are stranded on the shoreline, ensuring that the appropriate cleanup techniques are being employed for this particular response itself. Just to talk a bit about my role. So when I got mobilized personally out there, my particular role basically was evolving around some of these key areas, most especially around the developing of techniques as well. As my colleague has rightly said, even though it was a different enemy we're dealing with, there was that opportunity for us to transfer some of the skill sets that we have, some of the tactics that we know for dealing oil, to trying out into the plastic noodles that got impacted on the coastal areas of Sri Lanka. Doing heavily involving in SCAT surveys as well. So my colleague Bronwyn obviously talked about SCAT surveys, which was something we implemented, and kind of just prioritizing and defining certain shorelines, especially around shorelines that had massive impacts, and ensuring that the cleanup was employed through effective shoreline response management, because in some of the shorelines we had up to sometimes you had up to 80, sometimes you had up to 100, sometimes you had up to 150 military personnel on the shoreline. So just a matter of managing that, ensuring that everybody works safely and effectively, and ensuring that whatever technique we're employing, that's being deployed in the proper manner as well. In terms of stakeholders collaboration engagement, obviously ensuring everybody's briefed properly, ensuring that everybody kind of understand what their role is, what the expectation is, and that has to be on a daily basis, just to make sure that the message is passed on clearly and objectives for the day are being set, and towards the end of the day that is kind of being reviewed or being debriefed to understand hopefully everybody has kind of met their objectives. Contractor management, there was a lot of fabrication that was being done in country, as you can see from one of the photos at the top, kind of right-hand side corner. You could see what we call the trommel. So that was kind of fabricated locally in country. So we had a lot of local contractors there. So it's just a matter of working closely with them. There was a lot of remodification that was done for some of the equipment that was being fabricated in country. So managing that, and also not just managing what they produce, but also managing cost as well. Because with responses like this, you tend to find that some things are being requested for that are not needed, but just that knee-jerk reaction that you tend to get in some responses, whereby you're ordering a lot of equipment that you don't even need. So just kind of sense checking with the contractor, ensuring that whatever is being done is done in a very cost-effective manner. And just to kind of put it all together, reinforcing good practice in all of these fronts, ensuring that whatever guidance we're aligning to, whatever we're doing, good practice is being aligned, especially around safety, because safety is a priority and very important as well. Just to highlight some of the challenges for this response. So obviously I talked a bit about safety in the last slide. So when this whole incident happened, there was a lot of concerns around toxicity, because people weren't sure, what was the inventory on that particular vessel. So people were kind of a bit skeptical about responding to that incident in terms of understanding what was spilled, in terms of whether the products were hazardous, and ensuring that we just have the essential PPE and know what we're dealing with. Languages was a very key one as well, because imagine a shoreline where you're having 80 to 100 military personnel or volunteers on the shoreline who probably their first language is not English. So managing the group of people, assigning them to certain areas of the shoreline, and kind of ensuring that your message is clear. So one of the key ways I believe that was really helpful in this sense was sometimes instructions was being translated on a piece of paper on a daily of what is expected, or sometimes we're utilizing the environmental agencies officials provided they are around and on time on the shoreline, or sometimes we're even using some of what you find with them is some of the top officers clearly understand English, so just kind of dishing out instructions and managing that front through them to kind of divvy down the instructions down to their team. Sometimes because we're not necessarily in the parts of authority, as with most response, we are just there to influence. So basically building that level of credibility and trust amongst the stakeholders for you to be able to influence certain decisions and ideas that you might probably have to effectively respond to this particular incident. So sometimes just kind of managing in clear terms the level of influence you have versus what authority you have to ensuring that the response goes smoothly. Integrating mechanical equipment. So as you can see in the top picture there, we got some beach cleaners as well. So understanding in what shoreline that will be effective, because what we found is in certain shorelines, depending on the type of substrate, those beach cleaners were effective on some and not effective on some. So ensuring that that is being integrated at the right location, and also training is being kind of issued out in a safe manner for us to be able to make sure that we deploy this equipment safely for those shorelines. Sometimes chain of command, the different services obviously kind of are strictly aligned to their service. So obviously with the Navy, you don't expect an officer in the Navy dishing out instructions to probably someone in the Army. So you have to go through that chain of command. And sometimes when you want to kind of suggest an improvement in how cleanup is being carried out, that kind of presents its own challenge. Welfare as well is one of the issues in terms of PPE and welfare facility for the volunteers out there. Sometimes we had some very bad weather issues. So on those days, we probably don't necessarily come out to respond due to safety reasons. And when that happens, you tend to get some of the products that have probably sunk in the seabed because of the agitation from the sea. You tend to get some of the products coming up to the shoreline. Probably that was cleaned a day before, but after like a heavy weather storm coming in, you tend to go back to the same location and you tend to see a lot of products on the beach. So that continuous cleaning up as well, bringing up that continuous cleaning. The source of the spill, obviously, with some of the containers that sank in the seabed, were uncontained. So because of that, we had that continuous flow or continuous impacts of some of these products onto the shoreline. And obviously community integration, just kind of sensitizing the communities in terms of what those noodles are and not to kind of take them out of the shoreline, because what we found was some of the local communities living close by were digging up those noodles and basically selling it to local plastic producers. So it was an interesting one, but anytime we saw them, it's just a matter of educating them on basically not doing that. Understanding the enemy. So I wouldn't go in depth into this because my colleague Bronwyn has kind of touched upon this, but obviously with the impacts of that, you have a lot of the risks of having oil impacting the microplastics less than like 5 millimeter in diameter, which are basically the nodules themselves. You have the macroplastics. So some of the pictures there, you can see the where I have my cursor around, you can see some of the macroplastics that we're talking about. So those are the burnt noodles that have come of kind of formed this heavy thick layer. You have other microplastics. So for instance, you have some of the containers and mega pollution as well. Some of these containers showing up onto the shoreline due to obviously the heavy storm that we're getting and kind of the wind and currents bringing it to the shoreline, which was being recovered and stored in the waste area. Some of the response techniques in dealing with the enemy that we're employing, as I touched upon some of them in my role, was shoreline surveys, so establishing the areas that were heavily impacted, employing some manual recovery, enhanced manual recovery, so just kind of improving on some of the areas that we're employing manual recovery in those areas. Flotation method, so basically plastic in water, plastic with floats, putting them in plastic buckets and basins, and just kind of ensuring that we have proper separation of the plastic noodles from other debris that probably we might be recovering. Mechanical recovery, obviously with the beach cleaners, with some vacuum systems that we're getting, and also waste management. We needed to ensure that we're segregating the waste properly. And all of that was being informed by the net environmental benefit analysis process that Bronwyn has touched upon, just to help us to understand areas that we can employ some of these tactics that will be effective around as well. As I said, we did a lot of shoreline surveys, so basically prioritizing certain shorelines ahead of others so that we can divvy up resources to clean up that area as soon as possible, understanding what has been impacted around there as well so that we can generate our tactical response for each of the segments that probably might have been done in terms of the shoreline segmentation during the response. And also kind of coming up with that common terminology, as Bronwyn has talked about, feeding it back into the kind of setup of IMT that we have, and kind of generating our reports on a daily and understanding where we need to send our resources to. Shoreline cleanup obviously is an area that we heavily employed as well. So obviously providing that advice and guidance using some of our oil spill response knowledge to apply it onto these plastic noodles around manual and mechanical methods of separation. So what we call the Trevor table, the sieve table. So you can see the bottom picture there where we have some of our responders kind of having these mesh sizes of what we call the sieves, the Trevor table, and just shaking it, basically sieving out some of the products we're recovering, taking our sand away from the plastic noodle to be able to recover it. We had the trommels, which you can see in the top picture there, and we had the beach cleaners as well. So for each site as well, we had to develop response plans because every shoreline around there presented is different challenges. So kind of setting up shoreline tactical plans for each of those shorelines. Workforce management, having 80 to 100 plus people on the shoreline is not an easy task for you to manage. So ensuring that we're managing people appropriately and kind of sending them to areas that we feel were high priority areas for cleanup. Safety management, very important. And obviously making reference to the IPCA Guide Shoreline Response Program guidance, which had a lot of content for us there that we could use to transfer some of our knowledge and skill sets into the response. That's just a video of, yeah, it has no sound, forgive me, but if you can see the slide, that's just a video of the trommel being put into effect. So just putting the products in and you have those mesh sizes, basically separating sand or any other debris from the plastic noodle and basically recovering that. Waste management as well was a big task for us to handle. Ensuring that we're segregating all of these waste streams. So starting from establishing good practice out there, segregation or we had initial segregation issue, especially with the municipal waste that was coming in from the local communities. Waste storage was key as well. And obviously the onward disposal option, but this was at the end of the response because at that stage we're just separating these waste, recovering these waste and storing them in a facility that has been identified for us to separate them before it to be taken for onward disposal option. A key takeaway for me, basically, I think is just, you know, the plastic for us, we just treated it as another hydrocarbon, same kind of, but different, as my colleague Bronwyn has highlighted. And again, our skill sets are transferable, so adaptability. It felt like me and Bronwyn sat down to write our slides, but we didn't, I promise you. But it's just to show you how similar, you know, the plastic noodle response is. So adaptability is a core strength. Harry Potter can't help you here either. It's not something that you just place your magic wand and if you feel it will go. You're just trying out different techniques to make sure that we have an effective response. Plastic risk transcends the energy transition. So we're still going to use plastic. So that transportation, as Marta has highlighted, by sea is still going to happen. It's still a risk there for us to be aware of. As with oil, prevention and preparedness are essential. Obviously, talking about the field guides that Bronwyn has talked about, having that in place, setting up regulation or country plans around dealing with plastic will be really helpful. and always more to learn. At the back of the Torrey Canyon spill, there was a lot to learn. Regulations were changed or brought up at the back of that. So I believe with extra spill as well, that has triggered a lot of conversations around regulations, good practice, and ways to kind of respond to plastic pellets and noodles if it does happen. Right, that's me. Thank you very much. I think I'll pass on to Ines.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bami, and thank you, Bronwyn and Marta, for all the knowledge that you shared. This is like so interesting. I just wanted to remind everyone that the chat in this meeting is open. So if you have any questions at this stage, we have a couple of minutes to answer any of your questions. So just drop it in the chat and I'll read it out for our presenters. While people potentially drop some questions there, I'll give you guys a question. Is obviously it sounds like non-oil response, even if it's plastic or other, does require like specific techniques and even specific equipment. In your experience dealing with a variety of clients, is this something that is usually accounted for in their current like response or contingency plans, or is something that people tend to overlook because they're so focused on the oil?
I can start us on that. I think it's not only the fact that there is maybe not the procedures. I think one of the bigger complexity about this response kind of scenarios is that there's lots of parties involved, and who should be prepared. You know, are we then looking at the vessel owners? Are we looking at the cargo owners? Are we looking at the local councils? You know, it's the interface between the parties and the fact that they have to work together, and all of them have to be prepared and know their own roles, and then see, this is my role that I will be playing if that happens. What do I have to prepare? So it's not as much what response strategies are there, what I have to do, knowing what role I will be playing in this incident.
That's a really good point. So do you think it comes down to kind of like exercise and training, workshops where everyone gets together and talks about these things?
I think it's also an awareness as well of where we all deal with oil and there's regulations in place to have those contingency plans. It's maybe kind of that awareness of maybe you do need a separate contingency plan just because it's not legally required. But if you do end up in one of these situations, do you know what you're going to do? So yeah, I know that oil obviously comes with a lot of kind of regulatory requirements, legislation behind that, but maybe just taking that second thought as to, do you know what you will do, even though it's not legally binding type thing?
Yeah, very interesting. Amazing. Well, we don't have really any questions in the chat. I think you guys did so well that everyone knows what they need to know. But just in case anyone wants further resources, in the next slide, you'll be able to see a QR code that actually takes you to the plastics cleanup field guide that our presenters have been talking about here today. So you can actually access all of these resources, some tools to help you plan. So if you just scan this QR code, you'll be able to access this field guide directly, or you can go onto our website and actually access handbooks, response handbooks, and field guides from a variety of other topics, including NEVA, that our presenters also touched on during this presentation. If you do want to talk more about this, you can reach out. You have Marta's email here on the slide. You can also reach out directly to our shipping lead, or just reply back to the email myosrl at OSRL.com, where we can kind of connect you with the right team member to kind of talk a bit more about this. But thank you so much for everyone who joined today. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. And yeah, we're going to be sending an email out this week to access the recording and to access any further resources that can support you with this topic. And yeah, we hopefully see you again for our next webinar. All right, guys.